Hey everyone, we're still gathering, so we'll start here in just a minute or two. Well, hi everybody, thanks for joining us today. This is Dean Woodbeck with InCommon and Internet 2, and you have joined IAM Online for February 2021. IAM Online is brought to you by InCommon and Internet 2 and the EDUCAUSE Higher Education Information Security Council. We'll be taking questions today via the chat. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, you'll see the chat button. The default when you go into the chat is to send a note to panelists. So if you could click on that little down arrow and send your note to panelists and attendees, then everyone will see your question and everyone then will also see the answer if someone answers it in the chat. This session is also being recorded and we'll make the recording available a couple hours after this ends at incommon.org/IAMonline. So without further ado, I will introduce Kevin Maroney, the VP for Trust and Identity and Net Plus at Internet 2, and he'll give us an introduction.
Fantastic. Can you hear me okay, Dean?
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for so many attendees. This is really exciting. It's even higher than I was expecting. When Dean and the University of Minnesota team invited me to moderate today, I was super excited and tried to convince everybody to make it a 2-hour session because I feel like I could fill up an hour of my own. I was on your side of the transom for many years and and saw things from a very different light. And in the last 5 years, I've had this really interesting perch on how institutions go about doing identity and access management. And a dynamic that really fascinates me is that for most of you on the call, I'm sure you know we hold this camp series every year, right? So we have base camp, we have camp, and we have A camp. And because I get access to the registration data, I get to look at things like names and job titles and organizations. And it is not an exaggeration to say when we do an IAM specific topic that there are 80% or higher different job titles amongst all the participants of the event, right? And that's striking to me. People are called different things. They have different roles and functions at their institution and in their organization. So the people that are coming to us, well, or that we're convening, are coming at this from a very different set of perspectives. And it also suggests that the IAM function can report in any one of at least half a dozen different places in an IT organization: enterprise apps, enterprise infrastructure, CISO might have it, the chief information officer themselves might have it, combinations, right? It's a multi-homed function. In some cases, people will say it isn't anywhere because it's everywhere, right? And one of the things that's really exciting about what University of Minnesota has done is that they've moved from kind of an ad hoc and coping sort of posture. This is many, many years ago. And they've moved to a very intentional strategy for how it is IAM is placed within their organization. But the thing that you're going to hear in the Minnesota story is that even though they've made this move from sort of coping strategy to intentional strategy, is that they also know that our intentions might need to change in the future as well. IAM is very fluid, and it's common for it to move in an organization over a 5 to 10 year period. And I think that you're going to see that as well today. One of the questions I get a lot is, we're trying to develop a new IAM roadmap. Can you help us with that? And then the other one is we're trying to develop workforce around it, and we're trying to move to intentionality. And that's the story you're going to hear today. And I think you're going to learn a lot. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to an old colleague, or a colleague of old, I guess I should say, Bernie Gulechek, who's the Vice President for IT and Chief Information Officer at the University of Minnesota. So Bernie, take it away.
Thank you, Kevin. Dean, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. All right, great. Thank you, Kevin. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Bernie. I'm from the University of Minnesota, and I just have a few brief words to say before I turn it over to the experts and the folks that you came to listen to. A few years ago at the University of Minnesota, we we made the conscious decision to do exactly what Kevin described, and that is to acknowledge, understand, and then put into action the importance and a deliberate approach to identity and access management. It is without question, it is an extraordinarily important function within the institution's information technology management function itself. And our goal was to establish a well-defined set of folks who had expertise in this particular area, reposition them for success by setting up a directorate and a deliberate program to advance the identity and access management function at the University of Minnesota. And so today you'll hear from Chris Bongartz and you'll hear from KT Craig about how that evolution has occurred. And finally, you will hopefully see our intentionality and the drive towards both maturing and professionalizing this expertise at the institution and how important that is to us. So I will stop there and I will turn it over to Chris Bongartz. And Chris, take it away.
Thanks, Bernie. I'm Chris Bongartz. My title is developer, but I wear an awful lot of hats. I come from a sysadmin background, and we'll kind of see that as we go through here a little bit about how that plays into what we've seen. So if we start with the next slide. Just to give you a flavor of what this is like, you can kind of see from this graph that we've had we had a kind of a stable team for about a decade there in the late 90s into the early 2000s as the internet started to become a thing. Then we had a little bit of a shakeup in the late 2000s. And then since then, we've been on what looks like an exponential growth curve. I don't think our budget will sustain that indefinitely, but certainly we've grown significantly for over what we've been in the past. So if we go to the next slide. So let's talk about the origination next. I date it to 1992. There's main reason for that is because that's when I started college at the University of Minnesota. And I was in the first class that when we had campus-wide email for everyone. And so I actually started working in 1994 and started working on some of these with the group that did this. But so the trigger for the kind of what you could call the formation of what eventually evolved into the identity services is a need for consolidated student and staff data. And the mainframe itself is not quite enough to be able to do that. And so our central academic computing group, not to be confused with the administrative computing group that did all the mainframe stuff in the early 90s, needed to support there were two projects that kind of came together at about the right time to suggest this kind of solution. One was the Central Campus-Wide Email Project, and the other was the new ID card or U-card that was being developed. And so some things that kind of fell out of this this need here was some way for people to find each other's email addresses, because back then email is a new thing. Not everyone was familiar with it, so there was a big learning curve for some people, for pretty much everyone, on how that's going to actually work. And one of the things in there was address discovery. So these are the days, if you cast your memory back, we used to have paper directories, printed directories for phone books. And that was one of the things, is how do we get that email address in the phone book and that sort of things. The ID card effort was the other kind of key, is because it needed staff and student data. And if you didn't want to necessarily give them two different ID cards for two different roles, you just wanted the one ID card for the one person. And so there's about four to eight, depending on how you count it, people who had a hand in that, and most of us were sysadmins. There's a couple of application programmers. nobody that you would really call a business architect or a business analyst on our side of things. And so with the identity functions that kind of fell out of that it's just one of many services that our groups ran. And this core unit survived as a unit until our manager, the late Frank Gruey, passed away suddenly in 2004. We were under the single management we saw in that graph. That was a very stable, decade worth of time there, during which we were the internet services group. And so we took care of things like the Usenet news server and central email and central directories. We had the first central web hosting service before the web got big enough that it needed its own, own group. And so we've got, and Gopher, of course, was also invented just prior to that as kind of a competitor to that. So we ran a lot of those kind of central services. And the next slide. Vision, next slide. So without Frank, Frank was a strong leader, and the way he kind of conducted our group was, we had a lot of strong independent people under him. And so without him, we kind of tried to continue along, feel our way along. Instead of a supervisor, we had what we called a focal point in Kevin O'Rourke, who was took over as kind of the managerial role there. But eventually in 2008, our group got split up into different pieces. And so of the 8 people who were in the internet services group, we got 2 in the identity management role that was going to continue to take on things like the LDAP service, and then what we had come to call X.500, which some of you may recognize as the directory service that kind of predates LDAP. As the back-end person registry, where we kind of consolidated all the event data or all the people data from the different sources, student data, the student information services, the human resources services, the alumni association and foundation, and other potential data sources we were pulling things from. In 2009, we hired a third person to help out there in addition to me and Kevin. The other people went on to continue to support email services and some of the other things that went along with that. And that was also about the time that we started transitioning to Google Apps for education for our email service instead of having our own locally on-prem service. And despite some struggles with onboarding, with the new person, we did actually stand up our first SHIB IDP, second SHIB IDP, going to SHIB 2, I think then at that point, and a new grouper service. And so we got those going, and we ran them, and we were able to do that. We did have a bit of a culture clash with the new manager who was kind of put over top of us. And as we kind of were going to grow in the future here, Kevin and I were not traditional developers. We were much closer in spirit to system administrators. And so the way that we work with systems and the way that we handle those was a lot different. And so, we were pretty constantly accused of being cowboy coders who would kind of do our own thing without asking anybody, which in the decade prior had been a feature. But now, in particular, there was some leadership here, not Bernie, who were very interested in process over function and that sort of thing. And so we felt very constrained in that environment. Next slide. So we went into the expansion phase after that. Some of the triggers for this phase were we did an RFP and selected an Oracle Identity Manager for our function to kind of replace the X500 system. Also at that time, there was a major ERP system project called ESUP, Enterprise Systems Upgrade Project, that was going to separate our previously conjoined HR and student systems into separate ones because student only had different needs around when they needed to do major version upgrades versus HR, which makes a lot of sense. And then there was a financial system that was already separate that needed to be upgraded as well. And so, and then as part of that, there was also starting to be a new focus on identity management as its own function. And it was starting to, attract more attention from the higher ups who had previously kind of left us to our own devices. But now there's a little bit more interest in making that a more fully fledged part or component of our systems. Also during this time frame, there was a transition to the matrix model, as I like to call it, plaid management, because you've got lines and services kind of going at right angles and makes a nice plaid pattern if you color your org charts right. And so what we ended up with on the identity service, we had a service owner and then 2 devs and pseudo BAs, because we'd been doing that BA work all the time. We just didn't know what it was called that. In 2009, the OIM project kind of kicked off in force. It was originally intended to be done as part of the enterprise systems project upgrade, but it was wisely, in my opinion, separated out at a certain point as, we've got enough to chew with this enterprise thing. We're not going to throw a new identity system in the works at this time. That just that's going to be too much. And so that was kind of paused until ESUP went live in 2012, 13. And so and then at that time, they went in and started doing the OIM project, and that kicked into phase. One of the problems they discovered when they tried to do that is they tried to do that with a couple people who didn't really know the system, and then hired a consulting organization that turned out to be not a great fit. And so around the time when the consultants suggested they were going to take all of our COBOL source code and ship it off to India to have them translated into Java so that they could document it, that was about the time we said, yeah, no, that's no. And so we started over again, and we used a different consultant that actually knew what they were doing and had some experience in higher education. And that was still bumpy, but that was a lot smoother than we had with our original one. And so what effectively that meant is that pushed the actual OIM implementation. Remember, we did the RFP back in 2009, and we actually didn't start implementing until 2016. So there's a 7-year gap there. We got our first real business analyst in 2014, Eric, and he was very helpful in starting to get right-sized process applied to us. And it was our first kind of attempts at doing agile with a simplified Scrum method. But over time that, things kind of, it didn't stick all that great. We used it for a while, and then Eric got moved to a different team, and we had a couple additional developers were pulled in who were working on things. And so, and around that time, just after that, we've got these new people we're trying to onboard. We're trying to figure out our process strategy. In the meantime, our overall application development group, which is where we currently lived at that time, we had 8 people managed by 7 different managers. And I went back and counted between 2012 and 18, I had 10 different managers over that period of that 8 years. So that is not a recipe for consistency or quality or efficiency. And so next slide. We faced consolidation. Next slide. In 2018, because of that kind of managerial issue, as kind of reformulating things, we consolidated all the IDM staff under one line manager, which gave us consistent leadership, messaging, direction that we were kind of looking for there. And the particular person who was included, Matt, who is my current boss right now still, is a change agent who took ownership of that, was able to push some of the process changes through that helped kind of provide our service needs and being able to be that kind of foundation for us being successful. There was also a security event that we had ended up having to rebuild some servers and such. And that was a nice crisis to leverage some change and add an additional BA and project manager. And her name was KT Craig. We also had enlisted the age of business process owners. So we had a little bit more structured governance. So rather than me or Kevin kind of making up the rules and deciding, oh, that sounds like a good idea, or no, that's not, we actually had a little bit more guidance from the actual people who were people you would think were in charge of things, like, who makes the rules around how long your account stays around. Well, HR maybe has some input on the staff side of things, right? We tried using Kanban for our legacy identity system project. That was kind of our first big all-team effort. And then started to do some Scrum with a full agile implementation. In this case, the service owner was also the product owner. And that changed over time. Next slide. And then fission again. So this is 2020 here at the beginning of the year. So we're almost to the present. We were hiring new people to do stuff. We finally, we had the support of Bernie to actually build this team up, get more people in there, and until a single agile team was too big. And so we split into two different kind of sub teams there. We had the identity team that carried on maintenance of the OIM, or purchase and registry, and then an access management team that kind of took the other functions such as Shibboleth, Grouper, LDAP, Radius, authentication services in general as their part of it. And then, as you'll see later, KT will have the diagram for this. But in Tuckman's model, we went back to the forming stage. It was kind of, we got a reset. So next slide. Finally, we had a place of our own. Next slide. Trigger was higher management support, and also the senior director of applications development retired. And so this was kind of an opportunity to do a little bit of shuffling for things. And so was a new IAM directorate was formed that was separate from the app dev team. And then alongside that, we were adopting as a larger IT organization, a scaled agile framework for being able to align a lot of the smaller agile teams, which many of our smaller groups had started using Scrum or some of the other agile methodologies, and we needed a way to coordinate that across all of them. And then transitioning into staffing professionals. So rather than relying on me, a developer, now granted, I did high school newspaper work, but you shouldn't have me writing all the emails that go out to everyone at the university about identity management. So having dedicated communications people and change manager, having dedicated QA person who could do things a little bit more formally and organized, and that was, that's their specialty, that's their job. We have a diverse skill set, diverse demographics among the people who are hired. You don't have two old white guys anymore. We got some female employees. We've got some of different other backgrounds. And then we also pulled in the Active Directory team, which was a kind of a sub part of our Microsoft platforms team, into this group. And so, and this wasn't really possible before, logistically in the organization, the way it was structured before. Now it is, with the IAM Directorate, it makes sense. And we're in the process of getting that team into, and because we did a successful agile implementation of our other groups, we're able to pull them in as another team with that. So next slide. And at this point, I hand it over to KT, who will tell you the story of what things are like in kind of the new world.
All right, thank you, Chris. Yeah, now that you have the history of our growth, I'm going to share some of the workflow changes, as well as the tools and techniques that we use to get this new larger team up to speed. So again, I'm KT. I'm a product owner for the Access and Active Directory teams on the IAM program here at the U. And I was originally brought onto this team over a couple of years ago as a business analyst and project manager to oversee that security event that Chris mentioned earlier. And this was right after the team was consolidated under that one manager in the spring of 2018. And there is nothing like a good old security event to spur some change. All eyes were on us, and due in part to that security event, we were able to grow the team a little bit. So I became a full member of the team. And once we resolved that problem, we started running at the really unfun, but very necessary stuff like stabilizing our platforms and upgrading virtual machines, improving monitoring and coordinating work across teams. So we put out a lot of fires initially, but focusing on stabilizing and monitoring got us to a place where we could finally focus on the fun stuff, like beefing up Grouper to become the access management solution at the university, or even starting to embark on containerization. So next slide. To get to this point, changes in our workflow were absolutely necessary. Adding more people to a team isn't the magic bullet. It isn't the be all end all solution. So our previous work process was the last in, first out mentality. Put out that current fire, who is yelling the loudest, and contacting Kevin or Chris directly was what other departments did to get work done. And we also had multiple examples of a single source of failure for certain systems because of the initial team size. You know, those two folks had to manage so much. And this wasn't sustainable or scalable. And it wasn't reasonable or fair to Chris or Kevin, to be honest. So we went from that oral tradition, this is how we've always done things, to coordinated projects. So it was a team that used to rely on email requests and spreadsheets and phone calls to manage work, to one that started really tracking and sharing work via tools like Trello and Jira, and embracing ITIL best practices. Key work was now starting to be prioritized and planned in advance. So that is the dream for sure. So next slide, Dean. So in short, we went agile, like Chris referenced earlier, which I want to deep dive into now because adopting agile principles has been a key component to our success as we grew exponentially over the years. Next slide. So what is agile? I don't want to assume that we all know what agile is. So here's the wiki definition. The values listed here particularly resonated with our team, especially people over process. So now I want to give an overview on how we've tailored agile methodologies for our teams, mainly by using what's known as Kanban and Scrum, which Chris touched on as well. So next slide. So our journey started with a project, which is kind of a no-no word in the agile world. You should really talk about product, but you know, we got to start somewhere, and we started small. So we started phasing out an obsolete system. We were running a legacy identity management system written in COBOL code, and it was predominantly a homegrown solution created by one person who was about to retire. So we definitely needed to do something. And this system was also in the middle of our data flow from PeopleSoft to our replacement identity management system, which is Oracle Identity Manager. So issues and fires definitely occurred regularly because of that data flow and the reasons I mentioned earlier, you know, the single source of failure, et cetera. So we really needed to start phasing out this middleman. To give you a little taste of the work involved, just to transition one person-related attribute to a new identity management system takes analysis, coordination, coding, testing, bug fixes. This really needs to be done right, or we risk breaking a lot for our users. So we actually started with 60 key attributes. So how to manage all this? We really entered into basic Kanban. Using a whiteboard at first to visually track our work was how we started to understand and organize what needed to be done, and also when. And then we went online by using the Trello app, where we created a backlog of work where people could take task by task into columns of to do, doing, done. I'm sure some of you have seen that type of process. It gave the team members quick visibility on work in progress. And then we also held daily 15-minute meetings with the whole team to discuss the current work in flight. So this approach was seen very positively among the team members who originally had like these mini teams, these mini fiefdoms within identity and access. And now they were talking and coordinating work on a daily basis. Coincidentally, Central IT uses the Kanban method for our problem management, especially when we have issues that span multiple services. And it's been especially useful as we tackled last minute COVID-related work and IT support needs as the university really moved to work from home. Next slide. After the initial success of the Kanban method for consolidating, coordinating, and moving these identity management attributes to Oracle Identity Manager, our leadership and the team saw the benefits of embracing Agile more fully. And we all went to Agile fundamentals training. And then soon we transitioned from Kanban, which was that work in, work out operational model, to a more coordinated work approach known as Scrum. So we started planning work in 2-week increments or sprints. Scrum specific meetings that we hold are a 15-minute daily stand-up where we share our current work in flight, an iteration demo that occurs every 2 weeks where we share our completed work with stakeholders and with other teams, individual team retrospectives, what went well, what could be improved, what was out of our control, what needs follow-up conversation. In the retro, we talk about all those questions as a team. And then we also talk about if there's any changes that need to be made in our working agreements, and I'll get to what that is in a second. And then finally, iteration planning in 2-week increments. So basically, here is the chunk of work that we agreed upon as a team to complete in a 2-week span of time. It's non-operational work, to be more specific. And if something comes up that's extra, we talk about it and we reshuffle. Daily stand-ups are really good for having those types of conversations. Next slide. So as Chris explained earlier, our team has done a lot of forming, storming, norming as we grew. And we do reference Tuckman's model for team development often, especially as we add new people. And I want to share some of the tools and techniques now that we use to do initial team formation. And really, anytime a new person is added, we have to go back to some level of formation and review some of these tools. Next slide. So we initially held brainstorming events to bring the team together under one identity and access management umbrella. So one of the first things we did was a SWOT analysis where we took individual time and we wrote out our team, what we thought of as our team's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then we shared them all out as a team, individually, and then we synthesized them together really to show what we all agreed upon as our initial gaps that we needed to start filling and focusing on as a team. And then we started talking about specific work, prioritizing all of our work in flight. So what's taking your time right now? Get it out on a Post-it note and let's all talk it through. And then we really were able to decide what work needs to go now and what can be added to a backlog that can be further refined and prioritized in kind of more of a cadence, planned cadence. So we did do this in a pre-COVID kind of Post-it affinity exercise world, but our work as a team started taking shape really after that. And it also spawned some difficult conversations, to be honest, where people could vet their priority, make a case for certain work to be focused on, to build consensus, to have leadership buy-in as well. Also specific to Agile, we held 2-day working sessions with a facilitator where we discussed a team charter, our values, we developed working agreements. I know this does sound really touchy-feely, and when we gave a version of this talk to camp earlier this fall, someone in the chat had said to me that I should be a marriage counselor. I should not be a marriage counselor, but stay with me here. I really just like being a part of building some high-functioning teams. So our team charter, we really talked about our purpose. Why Agile? Why are we doing this? And we created a mission statement for the IAM program. The right people have the right access to the right tools at the right time. Next slide. We also talked about our values and on the other side, the anti-values, kind of as a point of clarification, not to point fingers necessarily, but we took a whole big long list of adjectives and the team was able to, vote on the top things that they really need to feel supported and respected as a team member of IAM. And then we took those top ones, they became our top 7 values that you see on the slide right now. And that was through another affinity mapping session. Next slide. Finally, we created working agreements, which is a living document that we revisit often. The purpose really is to develop a sense of shared responsibility, to increase members' awareness of their own behavior, to empower a facilitator to lead the group according to the agreements, and to really enhance the quality of the group process. So these are the agreements that are specific to our IAM team, and they're just things that we've agreed to help ensure that we're a respectful, fully functioning team. Next slide. So how we organize today, we've leveled up for sure. Starting this past fall, our central IT leadership has embraced Scaled Agile Framework, which the acronym is SAFE. We hold quarterly planning meetings between teams and secure leadership buy-in on the top priorities that we will accomplish in the next 3 months. We also seed features and work for future months as well, or future quarters. This doesn't include operational work. So we plan a 60-40 split for prioritizing work and ops. So for the Access team, the one example of our big deliverables from the last program increment that past quarter was upgrading the Shibboleth IDP to version 4. And now I want to share some of the benefits and challenges for undergoing a safe and agile model that really Chris and I and a lot of people on the Access team have kind of said as some of the really great things and some of the growing pains, in case this might help you if you're embarking on this journey. So the benefits, we have a common vocabulary really for discussing team formation and challenges. It's given us a way to communicate by encouraging feedback and also assuming best intent. We have a roadmap for work transparency and coordination has been so key. Like we really see where we're going. Jira, that tool that we use now for our task management, is really the source of truth. And daily stand-ups are highly valued as a place where we can share and build trust among team members. Leadership involvement and buy-in was absolutely key. I know Chris had mentioned this, that Matt Nuttall really got us on this path. He actually pushed us off a cliff and really got us going in the right direction with this. So that I think was so key to every member that he managed. And a side bonus, this really allowed for a smooth transition to a work from home life in the COVID-19 world. And then some of the challenges. Change is hard. I mean, you got to trust the people in the process. And sometimes that's hard when you don't see what that end goal is going to be or look like. We're also on the Access side, we're a DevOps team. We do more than develop, code, test, release. On our team alone, we manage 6 different systems and applications, and it's full stack, like Chris mentioned. And it doesn't fit a traditional kind of safe, agile team model all the time. So we still have specialists, we still have some single sources of failure. They can still exist, but on a much more limited scale. We do a lot of knowledge transfer to get everyone staffed up, but it still can be challenging in that DevOps full stack world. Also, this isn't a magic bullet. There's a lot of structure in SAFE, more than we might need, and ultimately, we use what works for our team and we don't want to over-processize a good thing. And next slide. When we gave this talk at camp, there were a lot of questions about the roles that fall under the IAM directorate. So I just wanted to give you 2 slides. This one is the leadership level. We have a senior director for the first time, Nathan Kuffner. I believe he's on the call today too. And Jake is a senior product manager, also our service owner. He is very adept in the agile safe world, a great leader as we embark on this, this safe journey. And again, like I said, much of this credit too is Matt Nuttall for pushing us off that cliff. Next slide. And then here are the 3 teams that are under the IAM umbrella. So we have Access, Identity, and Active Directory. I'm actually a shared PO on both Access and AD right now, but the vision is that we get a fully staffed PO there too. And these are kind of the roles that are currently under those teams. So now I want to touch on governance really quickly for the IAM program. Next slide. So our outward facing program page can be found on z.umn.edu/IAM secure. This is a good resource that shows how we talk about IAM initiatives to the broader community. And next slide. On this page, you'll see more information about our governance structure, and it's been really key in securing university-wide buy-in among our stakeholders. And our IAM leadership meets, I believe the life cycle, all of these key stakeholders meet about once a month. Next slide. Also on this page, you'll see our high-level initiatives and the timeline associated. But what all this boils down to is, what does this mean for the university community and why should they care? So next slide, please, Dean. So I want to end by sharing some of the positive impacts to the business. This is how we support the mission of the university. It isn't just how the team functions internally, it's all related. These are the problems we're trying to solve. Through a coordinated cross-functional team approach, we strive for increased productivity, enhanced security, and improved sharing ability for information across applications. So I just want to take some time to thank you all for your time today. I love talking about this stuff and meeting with other people if they want to go down this journey and talk to another product owner. I'm happy to meet with you. But now I want to turn it over to Bernie again for a CIO's perspective on our safe implementation and any other type of comments he wants to make about IAM. So there you go, Bernie. Thank you.
Thank you, KT. And I don't want to stand between now and questions, but I would just like to wrap up by underscoring the importance of the people that are part of the team. You've met KT, you've met Chris, many of you probably know members of that team. To get the right people into the right places, and for a senior leader like me to underscore the importance of this as a significant priority for information technology, and accepting accountability on behalf of the institution to drive change in this area and maturity and professionalism in this particular function, I think is absolutely essential to being able to achieve many of the things that you've heard about. And so with that, I'm going to step back and suggest that Kevin, I think you're going to take it from here.
Sure. It's kind of like taking a rodeo with the questions that have come in, but I do want to start and thank you, Chris, and others from the team that have been already answering questions. But the very first question that came in from Michael Levesque is striking to me, in that Michael's saying, I'm a member of an IA team, but we're spread out across various functions within the IT organization. And Michael's asking the question is, do you have advice for how it is to advocate for pulling all those slices of people and people underneath one function like IAM? I think it would be great to hear from at least Bernie and either KT or Chris, because I think Bernie is representative of a person or a persona to whom the idea has to be sold, and KT and Chris have their own journeys in the salesmanship of those ideas. So what do you guys think about that?
I'll begin by just saying that it never hurts to have the Board of Regents and auditors on your side. And at the end of the day, having a team that is willing to help you think through this and think through how to make it a priority. Because once you've established the prioritization, whether by crook or by cranny, there's a way to resource it, and there's a way to separate it so that you have the right kind of focus, the right kind of support, and therefore the right emphasis on the work that needs to be done. I'll stop there.
I'll maybe add that when I saw that question, what I thought was that, well, you can work that way, but in order to be successful that way, you essentially have to devote those people full time, 100% focused on identity and access management functions. Because if you don't, then what you end up having is you have competition between, well, identity needs me to do this today, and application development needs me to do this other thing today. Who's gonna settle that argument? And when we went to the matrix style of model, we started bumping into that a lot until, in a lot of, not so much in ours, because it just so happened that our identity people were generally dedicated to identity. And so we didn't do a lot for other service teams. We were pretty focused on just our one function. And so that doing it that way can work. But eventually you end up in a situation like we did, where we've got, 7 different team members with 7 different managers who are, pulling them and kind of pushing them in different directions. And you don't have this kind of being able to pull together that leadership into a single kind of place there to drive things forward. So I would say that, yeah, you probably could make that work, but I would advise against it.
And Michael, I'll just say that I think ours was mainly team and internally driven versus forces outside in higher spots in IT leadership, just for how our team functions. And of course, having Bernie and the Board of Regents as a point of support is very key.
Bernie was great about saying, IAM is important. We need to support these people. We need to have enough money to get enough people in there so they can do their jobs and do a good job of it, so that the university can function efficiently. But he wasn't super prescriptive about exactly how the teams get formed or anything like that, other than kind of at a certain point embracing the SAFE mechanism, which really is a good mechanism for allowing communication between larger teams. And the biggest benefit from SAFE, in my opinion, is that infrastructure is less surprised when we ask them for stuff, and vice versa. And that's really what it is. That's it's not hurting cats. It's hurting big cats, lions and tigers and stuff, because they're larger. I don't know.
Oh, I do have to say, I'm reading the chat and I saw that Matt Nuttall did answer Michael on some of the other things there. So I think that's beneficial. Thank you, Matt.
Yeah, there's some really good questions coming in. I'm going to combine 2 here. I think I'm going to maybe aim it initially at KT, but you guys are handing off really well. Ivy asks a question. I'm not sure I understand system versus processes. If you have any single points of failure, how do you mitigate and eradicate this if nothing is written down to explain how your process works? Am I missing something? And I would encourage you to want to combine this to a question a little bit later in the chat, which is, because I think this relates to how does Agile work, or how does SAFE, really work. So diving a little more deeply into that. But there's another question a little bit later down. It's like, how is this all working in, a world defined by Zoom interactions, as opposed to being in the same room with one another?
Oh, I can tackle that last one quickly, I think. Well, since we're a distributed university, we have been very used to holding meetings on WebEx or Google Hangouts, and now Zoom. It's very normal for our work, especially when we're working at IT people from local departments and collegiate units. So just meeting face-to-face in an online setting was super normal for us. So moving all of our Scrum type meetings to an online Zoom model was no challenge whatsoever for the team. Like, we still had Jira, and now the things that I do differently, we would meet in a room and I would pull up Jira and we would talk about what we're working on today. We do that the same way by screen sharing here in Zoom. So Chris, if you have any other thoughts about Zoom and any challenges in a work from home environment, I've really not seen a ton. I mean, you miss some human connection, of course, and that's always tough, but we're in stressful times too. So any thoughts on the Zoom part?
One thing that we had started to do a little bit before COVID hit, but has really taken off since, is we do a lot more at the technical and developer level, do a lot more working meetings where we'll sit in a Zoom room and one person will drive and work on some problem while the peanut gallery commentates and or takes notes. And that's tremendously useful in knowledge sharing, because in the olden days, I would have sat at my computer in my cube and huddled down and worked through some process such as upgrading IDP4. I do that all myself, and then at the end of that, I'm an expert in that, and nobody else is. And this kind of flips that around so that now we're all working together on the project, on the problems together as a team and capturing this output so that we have multiple people who are becoming experts, and we got a little bit better documentation trail behind us as we do that. And this is something that lends itself well to Zoom as a mechanism for that. In the physical space, we do actually have some space in our building where there's a bunch of kind of cubes that are set up with a big monitor where we could all bring our laptops and sit down and do that. And so that was kind of we were starting to use that a little bit here and there, but we had to go all the way down to the 5th floor. Who wants to do that? But it was worth it in some cases.
Yeah, and I think you're dovetailing nicely into Ivy's other part of the question, which is, how do we mitigate and eradicate those single points of failure, and if nothing is written down or explain how the process works? And we are so thankful in the fact that Chris is a very good writer as well as a leader and teacher for all the things that he knows. Like, Chris really does have the keys to this castle, and he has shared those keys. And I think that that's really important to have your working agreements together, that you are all talking together, and this is the expectation of how we work together and knowledge share. But we also needed to get some more business analysts who could also help with that documentation process, which we didn't have a lot of before. It really was, let's put out a fire, who's yelling the loudest. But now we have much more kind of a structured cadence in which to talk about those single points of failure and get other people involved. And like Chris said, I mean, every change that goes through, if Chris is the expert, it might be someone else that is assigned the change, but he's there in the Zoom room helping and watching and giving feedback. So I like that point, Chris. Thank you.
There are more questions, and they're all good in the chat window than we're going to be able to get to today in just the hour's time. I'm going to pull one out because it's one when we could be face to face. This is one I would get, at a coffee break, I'd be pushed up against the wall, and interestingly, it would come in like 3 different flavors. The questions from David Bassin. Sorry if I butchered the pronunciation, but what should be the relationship between identity and security? How do you work with security so that their priorities don't overwhelm identity priorities? And when I get hit with this, like, some people are like, oh no, now we're reporting to the CISO, woe is us. Others are like so excited that they're reporting to the CISO function. And then others have an ambiguous relationship. So how has that all worked out and played out at the University of Minnesota?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we have a dotted line, actually. So Dylan Bogenreef, he is our security architect, and he does directly report to the CISO. So and he is dedicated to us, to IAM. So we are working with Dylan as our security architect, and he is representing the University Information Security arm of OIT and the university as well.
We also have a security team that understands their position in the university. They're not the ones who really, in most cases, they're not the ones deciding how to implement things. They're the ones who help organize the policy, and they'll work with you to help you understand and say, here's best practices and such. But at the end of the day, it ends up being on the units to be compliant with university security policies and such. And so we really rely on Dylan to kind of represent the voice of security as one of the many voices at the table to understand what's going to go on. And in general, of course, that still means that if you want to do something different, you better think long and hard about that and be ready to defend yourself, because someday the auditors are going to ask about, well, why didn't you do it the way the security guy said? And we can then say, well, because hopefully we've got that document. So, but he's part of the team. and is that kind of adds that extra voice. And then we have a lot of people on our team too who are just generally naturally security inclined, and so we have a security mindset when we develop a lot of these things, and we really have to do that. So and so we've kind of got that as another angle at which that comes in.
And Kevin, I just want to take a minute to mention that it's so nice to have 3 of our IAM leaders answering questions in the chat right now. So Matt and Nathan and Jake are in there helping out. So thank you. I think that's really great.
Yeah, Dean and I appreciate it as well. Makes for a really rich session. We're pretty much going to run out of time, and I'm really glad that Matt was able to answer Patrick's question about retaining and locating talent. This is going to come off as a bit of a shameless commercial, but one of the areas of activity that we have been unambiguously guided towards by our Trust and Identity Program Advisory Group and also the In Common Steering Committee several years ago. A big concern was identified in helping institutions, if not identify and recruit talent, but also grow talent. And that's a really important design point in our camp series, Base Camp, Camp, A Camp. We do training for all of the components in the In Common Trusted Access platform. And at Base Camp, by the way, there's no bias to any solution. It's just talking about how you get stuff done in IAM. So it's not a vendor sell, right? And then we also have the Collaboration Success Program in this IAM Online series. So one of the functions that we try to do at Trust and Identity and In Common Internet 2 is to create a life cycle of learning and create a community of learning so that when you do have turnover or you have trouble identifying specific IAM talent, there's a place you can go to help jumpstart those people or take them to the next level. Because there's an extraordinary number of very, very talented people in these spaces, and you've gotten to meet a few of them today. So with that, I want to thank Bernie, Chris, and KT for sharing your story once again, your really good story. And I want to turn it over to Dean for a quick closeout. Thanks everybody for coming today.
Yep, and then my thanks too to KT, Chris, and Bernie. And I just posted in the chat a link to the software training that Kevin was talking about. And I think that's it for today. So thank you all for joining us. Oh, I guess the other thing is I'll post the slides and the video at incommon.org/IAM online. The video will be up in a couple hours. I'll do the slides probably in the next 20 minutes or so. So thanks everybody for attending today. Thanks for the great presentation. Have a good rest of your day.